great to be here. I'm honored to have been asked not only to be here, but to fill this role. I guess I probably should have stood when someone asked if a representative of the governor's office was here today. I am. The governor wishes he could have been here today. As you may well know, he had previously committed to give an address to the Nevada Development Authority on economic development at their annual luncheon today. So he was in Las Vegas, but I'm pleased to be here and would have been either way. I would also say I was optimistic about the future of Nevada, but my boss, I think, has copyrighted that word. So how about excited? I think we have a great future, and I echo the comments that were made before me. I also want to recognize a couple of people here today. Dana Bennett is in the audience. Dana is our regional director. And we've restructured the office a little bit, and we have regional directors both in the north and the south, and that structuring relates significantly to the work that we are embarking on today. We think it's important that we have that relationship between the state and the regions across the state. So that regional director position is new. And Dana will be working with all of you going forward, making sure that there's a strong bond there and great communication. Also want to recognize Mike Skaggs, who couldn't be here today. He had to take care of some bureaucratic state business, and one of us had to be there, so Mike drew the short straw. But Mike has been some real glue as we've gone through this transition. I appreciate all he's done. It's been a difficult and maybe exciting, but change is hard. And I know the development authorities, the chambers, all of you in economic development have been a little bit on pins and needles as we've gone through this effort. And I appreciate you all continuing your work and continuing to hold this process together. Mike's been a big part of that, and I appreciate it. I also want to welcome Mike. I thought I was the new guy on the block, but I have 9 times more experience in my job now than Mike does, so we're excited to have you here. I got to meet Mike over the phone a couple of times through the process. I think he's a great choice, and I think he will be a great leader in this area. I'm going to talk about a few things today. I'm going to do a short recap of 2011, and then talk about how we move this forward, and from my perspective, and what the state's going to do, and how we should interact. I hope that 2011 goes down as a remarkable year for economic development. It started with Nevada 2.0 in Las Vegas in January. We heard there from experts, and we heard that economic development in Nevada needed a higher focus. It needed to be governor-led and private sector-driven. We needed to develop a state plan, and we needed to develop a unified, cohesive effort. I'm not sure if you've heard, but we're trying to develop a unified effort in Nevada. You probably will get tired of that word after a while. And I want to say that I have talked with people across the state, and that message has been delivered, received. I think everybody is on the same page. All of our partners in economic development are focused at this point. That's education, both K through 12 education and higher education, elected officials, the chambers, the business associations, individual businesses, community leaders, all are focused on economic development, all want to help. All want to help develop a unified effort. I think that's a unanimous, we are unified on that. We also obviously passed AB 449 during the last session, and it was tough. There was work in order to get that bill not only passed, but correct. And I think we did that. There were a lot of you who worked on that effort. It was important. But what passed was a bipartisan effort. And this effort does not only go across the divisional lines that we draw for counties and cities across Nevada, but it also spans those political lines that we may draw on other issues. So we have a true bipartisan effort, and that's important. I think it'll stay that way. As we went through that effort, we also commissioned the Brookings and SRI study that was obviously released on Monday. If you haven't had an opportunity to read that whole study, it's a big study. It's about 180 pages. I would encourage you to do so over the next few weeks. It's really good work, and it is reflective of the input that Brookings and SRI received from Nevada. It's one of the things that has been said to me repetitively. It was great to see how the work evolved over that 4-month period. Brookings and SRI reached out to many of you and to many across the state, and that input was not only heard, it was included in the study. We think that's important. They also took a look across the country, as I had the opportunity to do about a year ago, to look at best practices in different states. And Brookings and SRI do this type of work on an ongoing basis. They have relationships not only throughout the country, but throughout the world. And they make a lot of great recommendations, some very helpful recommendations on a variety of topics in chapters 5 through 7. We'll talk about a little bit of that today, but I would encourage you to look at that. The acceptance of that report has also been bipartisan and broad. The governor's office today, and the governor today in his speech to NDA talked about the significance of that report, the fact that we don't need to reinvent the wheel as we move forward. We've done a lot of great work in Nevada. That report took all that into consideration, gave us an outline for moving forward. The Brookings report obviously was titled Unify, Regionalize, Diversify. It pointed out early that the state needed to develop a state economic development plan and lead. They pointed at many of our weaknesses, some of which was from weak leadership and lack of focus at the top. So we are going to start that process as well. And I want to talk a little bit about what the state's going to do, a little bit about the state economic development plan and what the role and the partnership that we want to have with the regions across the state will be. I want to talk about the Regional Development Authority process and appointment, because I think those are all critical things to moving forward. Some of the things that the state will do soon. We will be hiring what Brookings calls sector champions, what we have been calling sector specialists. There are 7 sectors in this report. We think it's important that a person at a state level gets up every day thinking about how to help move that sector forward. Those people don't necessarily have to be in a state office. They can be embedded at a university. They could be at EDON or NNDA. They could be at the chamber. They should be where it makes sense for them to be, where they can be the most effective, where they can bring in the broadest group of people to help. We will have some of those sector champions in the north. We will have some in the south, depending on where those focuses are. There are a couple of the sectors that have a very broad statewide presence, so those folks will move back and forth. We've talked about regional directors. We will also follow on with these sectors by bringing in some experts from around the country and building on the work that Brookings and SRI did to do more in-depth analysis on those sectors. How do we catalyze, how do we move those sectors forward? We will take a look at incentives and abatements. There's been quite a bit of discussion about that topic. We will look at our competitiveness on incentives, as well as the effectiveness of the incentives that we have in place. I've heard from local governments, I've heard from other businesses around the state that have a broad variety of opinions. Certainly the legislature does as well. So we will look at that. We have the responsibility to develop a state plan for inland ports. It's an opportunity that we have both north and south in Nevada and potentially in some of the rural areas. This is an opportunity that we want to capitalize on. The legislation that was passed in the 2011 session requires us to take a look at what those opportunities are and develop a plan. We'll do a couple of things that are a little different than have been done in the past. We will, in addition to the RDA process and the funding that is set aside for that, develop some competitive grants over the next 6 or 9 months. We will, potentially develop a contest for the most creative sector idea that comes out of the state, or the most collaborative innovation process, or the most innovative entrepreneurial partnership with a university system. We think that does a couple of things. It helps provide some financing for some of these initiatives that are important. These grants may not be very big, but it does help spur them. We also think it will generate thought. One of the things that I found is when you get people in a room like this and you ask them the right questions, the people in Nevada have these answers. So we want to help spur those questions and those conversations. We want to spur partnerships and people working together. And we think those are some efficient and kind of exciting ways to spur economic development going forward. We also, as we put the state plan together, understand that there is a sense of urgency in Nevada that we need to respond to quickly. So we will try and get the first version of the state plan out in the middle of the first quarter of this year, late January, mid-February, in that range. We would like your input. In fact, we'd like it now. It's one of the things that I'd like you to start talking about. Mike and I talked about it earlier today. Rob and I talked about it yesterday. We need, in the next couple of weeks, your initial thoughts on the Brookings plan, what you think should be in the state study, what you think maybe shouldn't be in the state study or in the state plan. But we are also going to encourage regional economic development planning in 2012 that we would like to see done in the next 9 months or so that regional planning can then be folded into the state plan, and we will issue a second version of this state plan once we get those regional plans put together toward the end of 2012. This region has a real head start on that. Both EDON and NNDA have commissioned plans over the last 5 years. They're good plans. They can be built upon. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can do this quickly. You don't have to take 9 months for that matter. So we'd like that input as soon as you can get it. And we will help finance that effort as well. So there will be some matching dollars available for regional planning. Other areas in the state are not as far along in those planning efforts as you are in this region. Las Vegas has not done an economic development plan in anybody's recent memory. It's obviously a big part of the economy in the state. There are conversations now about how to get that started, but that needs to be done in those regions. One of the things that Brookings pointed out in this study is that states don't really have economies. States have and oversee a collection of regional economies. So this regional planning and regional input we think is a very important part of the process. We also have created the Catalyst Fund and the Knowledge Fund. The Catalyst Fund has a $10 million one-time contribution. We are in the process of writing regulations now with the Commission. Those regulations should be out probably in January. The Catalyst funds will be available at the same time that the state plan is published. We want those Catalyst funds to be efficient and also strategic. We want them to line up with the sectors that we're targeting. And from my perspective, and this I don't think will be in regulation, the money that we spend through the Catalyst Fund should be even more efficient in creating jobs and creating capital investment than the money we currently spend in economic development. There's no reason to put that money in the Catalyst Fund if we get lesser efficiency than we would if we would have put it in in the economic development effort we're going for now. So as we look at that Catalyst Fund grant process, we will be looking for really strategic and really effective use of that money. It's not a lot of money, but we think it can be an effective use. The Knowledge Fund does not have any funding at this point. It is capable of taking private donations. We think there's some opportunities for that. We will be putting regulations together for the Knowledge Fund. And I think once those regulations are together and we can talk with the university system about the best uses for that, we should look to the private sector to get that fund jump-started. The appointment process and the funding process for the regional development authorities certainly caused some angst during the last legislative session, and maybe still. I think that it's important to say that this should be a regional conversation with the state and not a process that some may have gotten the impression, because the law allows this, for me to just decide what the regional development authority is going to be like, what that structure is going to be. I don't think that makes sense. I don't think any of you would think that makes sense. So we need to have that conversation, and that conversation has started. It can be a difficult conversation, and there are some layers to it. The chairman talked earlier about the need to work together in the counties throughout the western and northern part of Nevada. And I think they all agree with that. I think everybody involved agrees with that. We need to figure out how to do that. There are a variety of ways to do that as well. We could have one organization, we can have more than one organization. We should do this in a way that makes the most economic sense going forward. This should be focused on our customers and not on us internally, and it should be focused based on these economic sectors that we're looking to spur and the opportunities that folks outside of Nevada see coming here. For example, there was a conversation last week amongst several rural counties about the possibility of developing a regional development authority around mining across a broad spectrum of counties. That may make sense. We have the ability to do that. The way 449 reads, it gives us complete freedom to develop what makes the most sense. So that customer focus, common sense, how do we work together and drive the region forward, I think should be the guiding principle there. We need to get and start now getting into the specifics about how that's going to work and how we build those relationships going forward. We talked about forgetting the past and moving forward. We do have largely a blank slate. But I think we need to be aware of what has caused the issues in the past and have a conversation about how to make sure they don't happen going forward. And those types of conversations where honest disagreements or honest concerns between two different areas, but that are had in a conversation with the goal of working through those differences and finding a solution, is what is going to develop the trust that supports that unity that we're all looking for going forward. We've had difficulties with how to allocate leads from economic development authorities. We have had groups that want credit for what happens in the region. We need to figure out how to provide the right incentives so that those types of things don't happen. Everybody involved in this conversation is resource constrained. Nobody has an excess amount of money. There are a whole bunch of great ideas in the study. We're going to have a whole bunch of great ideas in the state economic development plan. But we have to prioritize those. People will have different priorities, different ideas on what should be the top priority, where we should expend resources when we have them. Those kind of conversations need to happen, and need to happen pretty quickly.